Okay, so on the topic of remakes and stuff like that, I did come across this because one other developer out there kind of gave a warning. But yeah, so because there's been recent rumor now of a Final Fantasy 6, 8, or 9 remakes, and this is I've seen more of like 9 in particular has been mentioned recently for remake. And it says would need so Final Fantasy 6, 8, or 9 remakes would need even more games than the Final Fantasy 7 trilogy. Which honestly, I mean, I I, I still think they could have done better with the 7 remake personally if they kept it more in line with the actual original storyline instead of doing this basically big what if Sephiroth tries to rewrite the story, tries to change history, tries to revise history. Yoshi-P warns we'd probably end up having to release them in 4 or maybe even 5 installments. But again, that because they've condensed the storyline of 7 considerably. There's supposed to be much more that, takes place and keeps things a lot more, I guess, stretched out, but then that's also part of the gameplay of then traversing the world and getting to these locations and stuff like that. But I feel like it's been condensed, but then they've condensed it, but then added a bunch of silly fluff. And again, for the what if storylines, because they're really especially after this most recent remake, the sequel to it, to the Final Fantasy VII remake, with what was going on with Zack, it's like I said, they're going for some silly buggers like. I've been starting to call it too. I have called it before too. Like it's Final Fantasy VII, the multiverse of madness. Now you're getting into alternate timeline tier bullshit and what ifs, and just because like what if Zack survived for the sequel. They do a whole like thing of what if Zack survived, got to Midgar, but everybody had apparently died. So I got a weird feeling they're leading towards like basically resurrecting Zack. Or at least like this alternate version of Zack. He's gonna come into the main timeline. It's gotten ridiculous. Anyways, at least if the JRPGs were remade in the same fashion. Careful what you wish for, Final Fantasy fans. Potential future remakes of other games in the series would probably require even more individual parts than the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy. At least if they were remade in that same style, according to Final Fantasy XIV's Naoki Yoshi-P Yoshida. The MMORPG director said as much during a panel at FanFest Berlin, with Final Fantasy Remake lead Naoki Hamaguchi also in attendance, warning folks that the wait for an entire remake of Final Fantasy VI, for example, would be even more painfully long than what we've become accustomed to. While Final Fantasy VI has its fan base, it's not nearly to the same level. And I'm not like talking down on Final Fantasy VI or nothing. It just did not have the same exposure, and certainly not nearly the same explosion of popularity. I guess that just kind of goes into the exposure thing, but it just it didn't hit the same way for people the way Final Fantasy VII did at the time. Because Final Fantasy VII just exploded, and I mean we eventually got a movie. We've gotten spin-offs. We got Dirge of Cerberus, which is a kind of janky fucking game to play. I tried replaying it recently. And, of course, we got Crisis Core. There's been, like, anime spin-offs. Mainly, like, there was, trying to remember what it was called. But there was, like, the whole anime thing for Zack and Cloud when they bust out of the experiment pods or whatever in Nibelhelm, Nibeltits. But then the journey getting to Midgar and then that whole thing. And honestly, I still prefer the scene from the original game. It's a lot more bleak and kind of to the game's mood and setting. Wow, now they've just gotten really silly buggers with it because it's just gotten so overdone. Because now it's like, oh, you got Zack who faces off against an army of soldiers, especially with Crisis Core. Crisis Core at the end, that's what happens. You face off against an army of Shinra soldiers, and they've like I know the whole the soldier first class is supposed to be like the peak of the soldier of the whole thing for Shinra, but like now they've just basically gotten them to near superhero tier stuff, like almost like, you know, it might as well just be Dragon Ball Z. Zack just powers up and starts going madhouse. But I don't think it, so my back to my initial point is I don't know, for some of these remakes, like I said, Final Fantasy VII made sense because of the popularity and everything, but also because, like, we had that tease back in the day with the PlayStation 3, the whole Final Fantasy VII tech demo. Everybody got really freaking hyped, and we were waiting, but it never came to fruition. So some of us, like myself, just kind of gave up on the whole idea, and that's why I have not cared to play it. I've only watched the storylines just to know what was going on in this remake. But yeah, so and for a remake, like, I didn't expect the Final Fantasy VII remake to stick to turn-based RPG sort of stuff that they were known for, but I think that also kind of hurt them because Square's kind of lost their identity a little bit over time because they've been going more the whole action RPG route. But crap, now I kind of but anyway, it's like for these other Final Fantasies, I just don't know if there's the same fervent fan base, other than maybe now with the whole remake crowd, and as rabid as I've heard some of them being, that might be what they're hoping to lean on. But last I knew, like, even Final Fantasy VII, the sales have been dropped from the first remake to the second remake, so they may not touch doing remakes for a while. Who knows? But anyways, the MMORPG director said as much during a panel at FanFest Berlin. Oh, okay. Go away. Quote, "Of course, I understand the feelings of the players, but you got to think about it." Yoshi-P says, per translator of fan requests for future series remakes. Look at Final Fantasy VI. It's such an incredibly huge game. The scale is just immense. But the same argument is true for other games in the series, like Final Fantasy VIII and IX, he adds. So, of course, now because you are working on the Final Fantasy VII series, I do get that people would be asking for remakes of other titles. But if we did remake those other titles, we'd probably end up having to release them in 4 or maybe even 5 installments. I would see if they were trying to redo 6, you'd probably be at 5 or so installments. But again, it depends on if they're gonna take this whole silly shit of remaking the story or rewriting the story, and that's why I'm still so adamantly against the Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic remake, because they talked about rewriting the story. You don't need to rewrite the story. Like, you can remake the gameplay, remake it in terms of like gameplay, absolutely. But although, like, with the whole what is that goddamn game? That freaking French turn-based Expedition 33. They kind of revived the turn-based gameplay format. So, I mean, you could do a Knights of the Old Republic remake, stay probably true to some of the gameplay mechanics and stuff, and having that turn-based style, while at the same time, you know, spicing it up, redoing the environments, making it maybe seem, especially like Terrace, seem more big and grand, or to maybe like a Coruscant sort of level, although Terrace is kind of the Timu Coruscant. But maybe even then, like, you can maybe some flavor here and there, sure, expand on certain spots, like when you get to Dantooine and start doing the Jedi training all over again, maybe add a little bit more for that, some extra side missions on Dantooine and everything, expand the planet a little bit more to go around on, you know, little things like that, but maintain the core storyline, because the storyline is also what got people into these particular games. Role-playing games are all about the story. So a lot of times with the games, I do think gameplay comes first, absolutely, storyline second, and so on. But for a role-playing game, yes, you need to have a good core gameplay, otherwise you may not want to go near it anyways. But I'd say the story is the big essential part for a role-playing game. That's what you really need to make the real source of the game itself because that's what's going to keep people's attention. If you hook people with that storyline, dragging them in, making them more and more invested, they'll overlook certain gameplay aspects. Like some people have overlooked Knights of the Old Republic's turn-based for the story, for the characters, what just what they're doing, what they're telling for the story that got people so involved in it, with everything from Revan. You got Candace in the Mandalorian side of things, which you could listen to him talk for hours. But then the whole, then you got the dynamics of going light side, dark side, having those different choices sprinkled throughout the game, all that sort of stuff. But when you talk about wanting to rewrite everything, change the core, change the story, that is certainly where you lose me when it comes to some with these remakes. But that's why I then love the System Shock remake, because that's staying true to a storyline. They just, kind of revamp the first person shooter aspects of it and everything, just to kind of get a little bit more that comfortable, less clunky old school approach, and more the modern, mouse and keyboard setup and all of that. And now also like controller support and everything. So that's the sort of stuff that they need to kind of maintain. Yes, up the visuals and all that. Because that I can see as also part of a remake, when you really do complete like remake environments to new standards and stuff like that for visuals. A remaster is when in my opinion, when you just kind of go through and update the textures. And that's what I basically do with Knights of the Old Republic. I'll get texture mods and technically remaster it myself with those particular mods, and make all the character models and stuff like that look a lot better. The environments look a lot better, the skyboxes and everything as well. That to me is like what constitutes more of like a remaster. A remake, yes, can get into like I said, changing up some gameplay, but you want to sometimes keep that core, but maintaining the storyline. You can add some flavor here or there, but don't completely change the identity of the game itself. You still need that familiarity, and that's even like, people, yeah. Anyways, so Final Fantasy games Final Fantasy games used to be absolutely huge in their scope because the developers couldn't render everything in excruciating detail as they can now, and that's both a gift and a curse, like a double-edged sword sort of thing. Nor did they need to. Final Fantasy VI was able to fit 14 playable characters, a huge world map that dramatically changed throughout the adventure, and countless epic fights onto a humble SNES cartridge. You can imagine how doing all of that in a game with Final Fantasy VII Rebirth's production value would be tricky. At FanFest, Hamaguchi explained that he felt ahead of Final Fantasy VII Revelation, Hamaguchi himself made clear that a hypothetical remake of Final Fantasy VI would be in better hands with another developer anyway. He seems more keen on doing something new after Revelation ships. At FanFest, Hamaguchi explained that he felt incredibly lucky that so many developers stayed together for all three games in the Final Fantasy VII Remake trilogy back to back. Quote, "That's why I can't just sit here and go, yeah, I'll remake 6, because it's not quite that easy." At least he's realistic about it. Perhaps the way forward for Final Fantasy remakes is the upcoming Final Fantasy Resonance, a gorgeous pixel art game that with turn-based combat, rather than the giant world of the Final Fantasy remake games. And isn't Resonance? Yeah, it was like originally a mobile game. I could have sworn it was like originally like a mobile game or something like that. And now they've brought it over to, it looks like it's saying the Switch 2. Yeah, because it's part of Nintendo Direct. Play on both Nintendo Switch and Switch 2. Like I said, I could have sworn this was like originally a, free-to-play mobile game. Yeah, that's what it was. Oh wait, Lapis, it shares the world with Final Fantasy Brave Exvius, the now dead free-to-play mobile RPG, and it sort of looks like a remake, honestly. So yeah, there's that, and I think I had one more thing on this front. Where was it? Yeah. Here. Oh, what? Right. So this was another article on this subject. I want this guy to make Final Fantasy 17. Yoshi-P embarrasses Final Fantasy 7 remake lead with the highest praise you can get from players live on stage at Final Fantasy 14 Fan Fest. Oh, okay, so wait, no, this is more of a... okay, so that's more for, like, sequel territory, but, yeah, so when it comes to, like I said, when it comes to, like, the remakes and stuff like that, or remakes in general, not just Final Fantasy. I wish they would for the Final Fantasy 7 remake, I'd wish they'd stuck to the core storyline. And yeah, like I said, you could have added some extra flavor here or there, a little extra side stuff, but maintain the core storyline that got a lot of us into that game, and also keep some of the beats, because and I noticed that there was some awkwardness to some of the storylines when I was watching the Final Fantasy 7 remake storyline. But hang on, I'm trying to. I really curtail my my watch or follow list on YouTube. Where is it? This is what I get for also I don't watch some. I don't. I've been cycling through so much different content right now. Oh, let's see. All right, hang on. Oh, that's funny. One of my clipped out segments popped. Okay, Sebi Webs. He's done a lot of comparison videos, or at least talked. He's done a lot of comparisons of, you know, Final Fantasy 7 remake versus the original for some scenes and stuff like that. And it's really interesting to see the differences too, because Final Fantasy 7, the original, certain scenes especially just flow so much better. They stay consistent with the action that's going on, and it keeps that flowing and going and keeping you pumped up. While in Final, like for example, when you are busting out of the Shinra Tower, when you first break in in Midgar and everything, before you get out into the big open world, you're busting out of that tower. That whole great cinematic scene, Cloud traveling up the stairs and they're crashing out through the window and then onto the highway, and boom, they're going. And then it gets you right back into the gameplay, and then you start that whole segment of fighting off the Shinra soldiers that are coming to attack you and your team and everything. While in then the remake, they go through that scene, crash out through the window, but then they cut away. They cut away into a whole other scene, and really just, it nosedives the action and intensity of what was just going on. And then when you do cut back to the heroes, there's still this slow down time before they even get into the whole segment of clashing with the Shinra soldiers. So like I said, it just to a halt stalled the action and just lost a lot of that intensity. And also kind of made no sense that it took so long for then the Shinra soldiers that were just following them, just had, you know, guns trained on them, took so long to finally catch back up, even though, like, they weren't on a different highway or anything. They were, like, practically on the still, you know. So it just, like I said, there's too many changes that also went on throughout it, in the core storyline in general, and they lost a lot of the tension and suspense with changing up these scenes. Yes, you have better graphics, but that doesn't mean you have better direction for the game. The people that made the original really knew what they were doing with directing and setting up the scenes and stuff like that. Nowhere near compared. Sorry. Anyways, that has been my little rant for when it comes to the remakes and talk of Final Fantasy remakes as well. I honestly hope this is going to be the last of it with Final Fantasy VII, and I guess maybe that other game. But I would much prefer, just go. I think Square needs to do some reconsidering, personally, kind of rediscover their identity as a game developer and what they used to produce. Because I mean, they used to just produce gold, but I would say, in my opinion, about Final Fantasy 10 and 12, that was where things really kind of dipped. I don't necessarily count 11 and 14 since those are MMORPGs and in a bit of a different, although they're mainline title technically with the whole sequential numbering, but for their main like single player RPG, that I feel like has been what just kind of has lost and fallen off, everything like that. So yeah, I guess we'll see what they decide to do. It'll all probably hinge though on how well the Final Fantasy VII remake title does. If it's like an uber success, then yes, you could probably see it happening. But if it doesn't hit those numbers that they want and need, then you could see it dropping off. Unlike movies, there's a lot more involved in everything with these projects to get them made versus movies and stuff like that, where they can still pump out slop even if they fail. But then we've been seeing failures not continue and stuff like that. So who knows? We'll see. We'll have to wait and see.
Thank you for watching this clip from Respawn Roast Cantina. Please like and subscribe if you like what you see, and check out the full episode.